"Throw the stray in with Harrow," Drieg called out over the feast, and the whole of my hall roared its approval. "It will be quick, but it will be something to watch." I remember the sound of it more than I remember deciding to let it happen. 300 voices, fat with mead and boar fat, hammering the long tables until the cups jumped. I sat above them all on the black seat my father had cut from a single slab of the mountain, and I felt nothing. I had felt nothing for a long time. Ironmark had bled through 4 winters of war, and a king who has buried that many of his own learns to sit very still inside himself, the way a man holds his breath in deep water. The reckoning was an old custom, older than my grandfather. When the harvest was in and the snow closed the passes, we gave the pack a night of blood to keep the winter from turning them on one another. Prisoners, oath-breakers, wolves too broken to work, they went into the pit below my seat, and my champion put them down, and the hall drank to the strength of Ironmark. I had watched 100 of them. I had thrown down the token that ended them 100 times, bored, my chin on my fist. "Bring her up," Drieg said, and grinned at me the way he always did, certain of my leave. They dragged her up the stone steps and into the torchlight, and the hall howled to see how small she was. She was a captive taken in the last of the fighting, when we had broken the Velic pack against the Weeping Ridge and salted their hold and driven the survivors into the snow. A war orphan, a stray with no pack and no name that anyone had bothered to learn. Her wrists were bound. Her lip was split and crusted brown. She wore a man's tunic 3 sizes too large, cinched with a length of rope, and her feet were bare on the frozen stone, and her hair was a dark, matted rope down her back. She could not have weighed as much as one of Harrow's legs. And Harrow came up the far steps to meet her. My champion was a mountain of a wolf. He had held the pit for 6 years, and in 6 years no one had put him down. He filled the doorway of the pit gate the way weather fills a valley. When he saw what they had given him to fight, he laughed, and the hall laughed with him, and he made a show of cracking his neck side to side, slow, so everyone could enjoy how little he thought of her. I looked at the girl to see her fear. That is the part I have never been able to explain to anyone in all the years since. I looked at her expecting the thing I always saw in the pit, the wet eyes, the trembling, the animal begging that came before the end. Every one of them begged. I had stopped hearing it. She was not begging. She stood in the center of the pit with her bound hands in front of her, and she looked up, not at Harrow, not at the roaring tables, at me. She found me on my high black seat above all of them, and she held my eyes, and there was nothing broken in her at all. There was something cold and clear and absolutely level behind her face, like the surface of a deep lake with the wind gone off it. She looked at me the way a person looks at a thing they have already measured and found smaller than it thinks it is. Then she looked away, dismissing me, and turned her whole attention to the mountain that was going to kill her. "Cut her hands loose," I heard myself say. Drieg's grin faltered, "My king." "Cut them loose. It is not a reckoning if she cannot lift her arms. Ironmark is not a slaughter yard." I said it in the flat, bored voice I used for everything then, and I told myself I said it for the honor of the custom, and I did not yet know that I was already lying to myself. They cut her hands loose. She flexed her fingers slowly, working the blood back into them, and she never took her eyes off Harrow. And I saw I was perhaps the only one in that whole drunken hall who saw how she settled her weight, how her bare feet found their places on the stone, one forward, one back, turned just so, how her hands came up loose, not clenched, how her chin dropped a fraction and her shoulders eased down. I had led wolves in 4 winters of war. I knew what I was looking at. I had just never once seen it in the pit. She was not a stray who had been thrown to my champion to die. She was a fighter who had been trained by someone who knew exactly what he was doing, and she had decided in the last moments of her life to make them earn it. Harrow charged. He came across the pit like a rock slide, all that weight behind a fist that had broken jaws and ribs, and the will of better wolves than the little Velic stray. The hall came up off the benches to watch her fold. She was not there when the fist arrived. She had slipped it not far. a hand's width, the smallest movement that would serve, so that all of V. Harrow's ruinous strength went past her cheek into empty air and dragged him a half step off his balance. And in that half step she was already inside his reach, and she drove the heel of her hand up under his jaw with her whole body turning behind it, hip and shoulder and the ground itself, the way you strike when you have been taught that a small woman's power comes up out of the earth and not out of her arm. V. Harrow's head snapped back, the hall's roar cut off as if a door had been shut on it. He did not go down. He was too vast to go down from one blow, but he staggered and he blinked, and for one heartbeat the mountain looked confused, and every wolf in that hall saw it, and the silence held, appalled, delighted, disbelieving. Then V. Harrow bellowed and came for her in earnest, and the fight became a real thing. I will not pretend it was even. It was never going to be even. He was 3 times her weight, and he had not held the pit for 6 years by being slow. He caught her, of course he caught her, again and again, and each time the sound of it made the hall flinch, the flat wet crack of that fist finding her ribs, her shoulder, once the side of her head, so that she went sideways into the pit wall and slid down it to her knees. The hall roared, Drieg laughed and reached for his cup. It was over. She got up. She got up the way I had watched exhausted wolves get up on the retreat from the weeping ridge, not fast, not graceful, but with a refusal in it that had nothing to do with the body. She put one bare foot flat on the bloodied stone, and she pushed herself off the wall, and she got her hands back up, loose, chin down, and she found her stance again, and she waited for him. I was leaning forward on my seat. I do not remember doing it. He hit her again, and she took it and answered a raking strike across his eyes that opened a line above his brow, so that his own blood ran into them, and he had to shake his great head to clear it, and in the shaking she was gone again, circling, patient, reading him. She fought like water finds the cracks in stone. She never once tried to meet his strength. She let it spend itself, and she punished the spending. She made the pit champion of Ironmark bleed in front of 300 wolves who had come to watch her die, and she did it with a face as level and cold and clear as the moment she had first met my eyes. He knocked her down a 3rd time, and a 3rd time she got up. And it was then, with her on her knees in the churned red dust, one hand flat on the stone, her dark hair hanging in her face, gathering herself to rise against a wall of muscle that should by every law of the world have already ended her. It was then that the thing happened to me that I have never had a good word for. The roar of the pit went out like a snuffed candle. All of it, the hammering benches, Drieg's laughter, the whole drunken sea of my pack, it all simply stopped reaching me as though I had been lowered under water. There was the girl on her knees, rising. There was my own heart, suddenly very loud. And there was a certainty that came up through the floor of me and stood the hair up along my arms, older than thought, older than the crown, her. I was on my feet before I knew that I had risen. I did not decide to throw down the token. I found it already gone from my hand, the black iron disc that ended a reckoning turning end over end down through the torchlight, and I heard my own voice come out of me in the war tone that could stop a charging line, the tone I had not needed since the last of the fighting. Hold. V. Harrow froze with his fist drawn back. The whole hall froze. 300 faces turned up to the black seat and found their king on his feet with his hand still open where the token had been, and none of them, not one of them, in all the years of my reign, had ever seen me halt a reckoning. The girl on her knees did not look up at me. She stayed exactly as she was, coiled, watching V. Harrow, because she did not believe for one moment that anything good had ever come from that high black seat, and she was not fool enough to lower her guard on a stranger's mercy. That, more than anything, was the moment I lost the war I had been fighting inside myself for 4 cold winters. I came down the stone steps into my own pit. I had never once set foot in it. The dust was soft and terrible under my boots, black with old blood, and up close the smell of it was a thing I had never had to know from my high seat. I crossed to where she knelt, and V. Harrow backed away from me with his head down, blowing, bewildered. I stood over her. She finally looked up, and there was blood at the corner of her mouth, and her left eye was already swelling shut. And she looked at me with that same level, measuring calm, and she said, in a voice rough from being hit but perfectly steady, "If you mean to do it yourself, get on with it." The hall could not hear her. Only I could hear her. And something in the plain, unafraid contempt of it went through me like cold water through a fever. "No one is going to do it," I said. She did not believe me. I did not blame her. I put out my hand to help her up, and she looked at it as if I had offered her a snake. She got up on her own, swaying, and stood there in front of me a full head shorter, and refusing, absolutely refusing, to lean on the wall or on me or on anything. I have led fierce wolves. I had never in my life seen anything as fierce as that half-broken girl standing straight up out of sheer, well, in the middle of the pit that was supposed to be her grave. I turned to my hall. They were dead silent now, every drunken face gone sober with the strangeness of it. "The reckoning is done," I said. "She stands. By the old law, a fighter who stands when the token falls is not put down. That was a true law. It was an old, forgotten, all but dead law, and I had never once seen a fighter live long enough to invoke it. And I do not think 3 wolves in that hall had ever heard of it, but it was real, and I was the king, and my word on the law of Ironmark was the law of Ironmark. She goes to the healers. She is under my hand until I say otherwise. Anyone who lays a finger on her answers to me." Drieg came to his feet at the high table, his face working. "My king, she is a Velik. She is spoils. She is nothing." "Then it costs you nothing to let her live," I said, and I looked at him, and whatever he saw in my face made him sit back down. I turned to the girl. "Can you walk?" I asked her low, so it was only between us. She looked at me a long moment with that lake-cold calm. Then she said, "I have walked out of worse than your pit, Alpha King." And she walked out of it under her own power, past the mountain that had not been able to put her down, up the steps and out of my silent hall, with her chin level and her ruined feet leaving small red prints on my grandfather's stone. And I stood in the churned dust of my own reckoning pit and watched her go. And I understood with the whole of me that nothing in my life was going to be the same. I did not sleep that night. I had not slept well in 4 years, so this was no new thing, but that night I did not even try. I stood at the arrow slit of my chamber and watched the snow come down blue over the courtyard, and I turned the thing over and over and could not make it lie flat. I was a king. I had rejected the mate question for as long as I had worn the crown. My council had paraded daughters of allied packs through my hall for years, gowned and glittering and eager, and I had felt for each of them precisely what I felt for the stones of the wall, nothing at all. I had come to believe the war had burned that part of me out, that whatever it was in other wolves that reached toward a mate, mine had been cauterized on the retreat from the ridge, in the smoke, when I had carried the bodies of my father's sworn men down off the mountain one at a time. And then a captive stray with a split lip had knelt in my pit refusing to fall, and the whole of me had risen toward her like water toward the moon, and I had not been asked. That was the part I kept circling. I had not chosen it. It had been true before I could decide anything about it. The bond does not ask the king's leave. It only informs him after of what has already become the case. Toward the gray hour before dawn, I gave up on the window and went down to the healer's hall to see whether the thing that had turned my life over was even still alive. She was. They had her in a low cot near the fire, and old Marta, who had bound my father's wounds and mine, was sitting beside her with a bowl of something that smelled of tallow and yarrow. When I came in, Marta got up to bow and I waved her still. The girl was asleep, or I thought she was, until I came closer and saw the gleam of her one open eye tracking me across the room. The other was swollen shut, purpled black. Someone had washed the blood off her. Cleaned in the firelight, she was younger than I had thought in the pit, and thinner, and the plain hard bones of her face were the kind that a man does not forget once he has looked at them. "You should be unconscious," I said. "Marta gives that draft to warriors twice your size." I poured it in the rushes when she looked away. the girl said. Her voice was still rough, but it had rested. I do not sleep where I cannot see the door, and I do not drink what strangers pour. Marta made a scandalized noise. I found, to my own surprise, that I very nearly smiled. The muscles of my face had forgotten the shape of it, and it came out strange. That is a hard way to heal, I said. I am not overly concerned with healing, she said. I am concerned with what you want from me, Alpha King, that you would break your own custom in front of your whole pack and then come down before dawn to watch a captive sleep. Men do not spend their strangeness cheaply. So, she shifted, wincing up onto one elbow and fixed me with the level eye. What is the price? I stood there in the healer's firelight, a king in his own hold, and I did not have an answer. Because the true answer was a thing I could not say to her. You are my fated mate, and I have known it for 6 hours, and I understand it less than you do, and any lie I might have told her, she would have seen straight through, the way she had seen straight through V. Harrow's strength to the bewilderment underneath it. So I told her a smaller truth. I do not know, I said. She studied me. It was not the answer she had braced for, and it seemed to unbalance her more than any threat would have. After a while she lay back down, carefully, and turned her level eye to the fire. My name is Neve, she said at last to the flames, not to me. Of the Velik, since you have not asked, and since a wolf under a strange roof should at least leave her name where it can be found if she does not walk out again. You will walk out again, Neve of the Velik, I said. She did not answer that, but I saw the corner of her mouth move, not a smile, nothing so soft, only the acknowledgement of a wolf who has heard a promise and filed it away to be tested later. I left her by the fire, and as I climbed back to my cold chamber the winter dawn came up gray over Ironmark, and for the first time in a long time I noticed the light. Drieg came to me the next day with the council at his back, and they were afraid, and frightened wolves are dangerous. She is a Velik, Drieg said again, as if I had somehow failed to grasp it. Her pack put a spear through your uncle at the Weeping Ridge. Her people burned the granaries at Halloway when they came down through the pass, and you have put her under your hand and set her above the champion of Ironmark in front of the whole hold. The pack does not understand it, my king. They are talking. A king who breaks his own reckoning for an enemy captive. They are asking what has come over you. He leaned in and lowered his voice, and made it the voice of a loyal man giving hard counsel. Some are asking whether the war took something out of you that has not come back. It was well aimed. It was, in fact, close to a thing I had feared about myself for 4 years, and a season before I would have let it land and quietly had the girl sent away over the pass to be rid of the trouble, and told myself it was for the good of the hold. But I had come down into the pit. I had heard my own wolf answer to her before I could think. And a king who has felt the bond and pretends he has not is no longer fit to sit the black seat, because he is ruling around a lie the size of a mountain. The war took a great deal out of me, Drieg, I said. It took my father's sworn men, and it took 4 winters, and it took the part of me that could still be surprised by anything. I had thought that part was dead. I looked at him levelly. It is not dead. She is not going away. And the next wolf who suggests that his king has been unmanned by an enemy stray had better be prepared to say it in the pit to me and not in corners to you. Is that understood? The council went out very quietly. Drieg went last, and at the door he turned, and there was something in his face I did not like, not defiance, but a kind of patient calculation, a man filing the whole thing away, exactly as Neve had filed away my promise. He had been my father's master-at-arms before mine. He had run the reckoning for 20 years. He had, I understood only later, come to think of the pit and its customs as his, and of me as a young king who had been letting him hold them. As you say, my king, he said, and bowed and left. I should have listened harder to the calculation in his face, but I was a wolf who had just discovered he had a mate, and I was, for the first time in years, thinking about something other than the war. She healed faster than she should have, and she healed watchful. I gave her a room, a real room, in the East Tower with a door that barred from the inside, because I had heard her say she did not sleep where she could not see the door, and I found I could not bear for her not to sleep. I sent her clothes that fit and food she watched the servants taste first out of a suspicion she did not bother to hide. And every day, once the black eye had gone down and she could stand a full watch without swaying, I went to find her, because I could not keep myself from it, and because I told myself a king should know what manner of creature he had brought under his hand. She never made it easy. "You are hovering," she told me the fourth or fifth day, when I came up to the tower and found her at the arrow slit watching the yard the way a hawk watches a field. "Kings should not hover. It unsettles the servants." "I am not hovering," I said, hovering. "You have come up to this tower every day since the pit. You bring no guards. You ask me nothing that matters, and you leave looking as though you have lost an argument with yourself." She turned from the window and looked at me with that clear, unsettling directness. "I have been the guest of powerful men before, Alpha King. It never ends well for the guest, and it always ends the same way, and there is a moment where the powerful man stops pretending. I have been waiting for your moment. It is taking a very long time to arrive, and the waiting is worse than the arriving. So arrive." I understood her then a little more. She had been passed hand to hand through the wreck of her pack's fall. She had learned that a strong man's kindness was only cruelty that had not yet gotten around to itself. She was not being hard for the pleasure of it. She was bracing, the way she had braced in the pit, for a blow she was certain was coming, because bracing was the only power the world had ever left her. "There is no moment coming, Neve," I said. "There is always a moment coming." "Not from me." She laughed the first time I had heard it, and it was not a soft sound. It was a short, disbelieving breath through the nose. Every man has said some version of that to me. You would be astonished how alike they all sound, right up until they stop sounding like it. I could have argued. I had learned enough of her already to know that argument was a game she would win, because she had had more practice at not being believed than I had at being believed. So instead I did a foolish thing, the kind of thing I had not done since I was very young. "Come with me," I said. "I want to show you something. If you would rather stay behind your barred door, stay. The door is yours. I meant it to be yours. But come if you will." She came, warily, a full pace behind me and a little to my left where she could watch my hands, but she came. I took her down through the hold to the practice yard, the low square of hard-packed earth under the north wall where the young wolves learned the blade. And I stood her at the rail and I said, "In the pit, the thing you did to V. Harrow the first strike up under the jaw with your whole body turning, and the way you moved your feet so his strength went past you. Who taught you that?" For a moment something crossed her face that I had not seen before, something that was not calculation and was not contempt. It was grief, quickly shuddered. "My father," she said. "He was a master. He was the war master of the Velic," she said. "He taught the old forms, the ways from before packs traded skill for size, before we all decided the biggest wolf should win and stopped learning how to make him lose." She looked out at my young wolves flailing at each other with more strength than sense, and I saw her jaw tight. "Your people fight like V. Harrow, all weight and forward. It is why one bad winter and one clever enemy could break you, if you ever met one." "We met one," I said. "We met the Velic." The words were out before I weighed them, and I saw them land, and I braced for her to close over like ice. But she only looked at me level and said, "Yes, you did. And you won because you had 3 wolves for every one of ours, and you burned the granaries so the rest of us starved through the passes. Winning and being the better fighter are not the same thing, Alpha King. Your uncle learned that at the Ridge from my father before your numbers finished him. Did they not tell you? My father put your war master down in single combat. It took 4 of yours to pull him off, and it cost you all 4. She said it without heat, as a plain reckoning of accounts. "And then a boy with an arrow took my father in the back as he turned, because your wolves had learned by then that the only way to beat a Velic blade was to not be in front of it." The yard was quiet. My young wolves had stopped to watch the king and the strange woman at the rail. I did not know, I said, that it was your father who I did not know. Why would you, she said. He was one dead enemy among hundreds. You have a hall full of the wolves he killed. I have one dead father and a burned hold and the old forms in my hands and nothing else in the whole world. She looked at me then, and for the first time the level calm cracked, just at the edges, and underneath it I saw the whole size of what had been done to her, and what my pack had done to make it. So when you ask me who taught me, Alpha King, and you look at me the way you are looking at me now, as though you have found something wonderful, understand that the wonderful thing you found is all that is left of a people your pack put in the ground. Forgive me if I do not warm to your wonder. I have stood in the smoke of a lost battle. I have carried dead friends down a mountain. I did not know, until that moment at the practice rail, that a person could make me feel more shame with a level voice than a whole field of the dead had made me feel with their silence. I did not defend myself. There was no defense. The war had been my father's before it was mine, and I had inherited it the way I had inherited the crown and the pit and dreeg, and I had prosecuted it to its end because that is what a king does, and none of that made her father any less dead or her hold any less burned. You are right, I said. There is no wonder that can be owed to you as a payment for that. I will not pretend there is. I paused. But I would learn the old forms if you would teach them, not as a captive's ransom, not to buy anything from you, only because the war master of the Velic was clearly a great master, and it would be a poor sort of honor to him to let the last of his art die in a tower because the king of Ironmark was too proud to be taught by his enemy's daughter. She stared at me for a long time. You want me, she said slowly, to teach your young wolves, the old forms, the forms that beat you. Yes. Dreeg will have a seizure. Dreeg will survive it. And there, for the first time, something in her genuinely shifted. Not softened, exactly. But the bracing eased a fraction, the way it had eased the night I had told her no moment was coming, because I had once again given her the one thing that no powerful man had ever given her. A request instead of a demand, with the door left open behind it. I will think on it, she said, which from Neve was a landslide. That night, for the first time in 4 winters, I slept. I did not know it was strange until I woke and found the whole night gone, the fire burned to gray ash, the light already up. I lay in the dark warmth of it, bewildered, cataloging myself for what had changed. And I found that the thing which had ridden me since the ridge, the sleepless, snapping, half-wild thing under my ribs that had made a good king into a cold one, that had paced the inside of me every night refusing to lie down, I found that it had lain down. It had gone quiet. My wolf, which had not truly rested since the war, was resting. I understood then, lying in the gray light, the second half of what the bond had come to tell me. It was not only that I wanted her, though I did, in a way that had nothing crude in it and everything terrifying. It was that she quieted the war in me. 4 winters I had carried the dead down the mountain and never once set them down, and a captive I had no right to and could not deserve had, only by being under the same roof, unbent something in me that I had thought was broken past mending. My wolf, which trusted nothing and no one, which had learned in the smoke to sleep with one eye open and its teeth ready, my wolf had decided, without consulting me, that near her it was safe to close both eyes. That is a thing I had never felt for any of the glittering daughters my counsel brought me. That is a thing I had not known a wolf could feel at all. And it terrified me, because it meant that the sane and kingly course, to send her home over the pass, to make what small amends I could for her ruined life, to let her go free of the pack that had burned everything she loved, that sane, kingly, decent course would take from me the only rest I had known since the war. And I did not know if I was strong enough or good enough to do the decent thing anyway. I found out sooner than I wished. She agreed to teach. She agreed to it, I think, less for my sake than because a war master's daughter cannot in the end bear to watch bad fighters fight badly, and my young wolves fought very badly. She came down to the practice yard the next morning in the plain clothes I had sent, with her hair bound back off her face, and she took one look at the sons of my best wolves swinging at each other, and made a sound of such pure disgust that two of them stopped and blushed. "No," she said. "No, no, put the sword down, all of you put them down. You cannot use a blade until you can stand up. Watch." And she set her bare feet in the dust the way she had set them in the pit. One forward, one back. Turn just so. And she showed them how power comes up out of the ground and not out of the arm. And within an hour she had my young wolves, who had come to the yard expecting to be given an enemy captive to jeer at, standing wrapped around her in a ring, doing the slow, patient, foot-first drills of the old Velic forms as though their lives depended on getting them right. I watched from the wall. I did not go down. I had learned that much, that she was more herself when I was not hovering, and that the surest way to be near her was, sometimes, to leave her alone. Drieg watched too, from the far side of the yard, and I did not like his stillness. She was a wonder to watch teach. She had no patience for weakness of will and infinite patience for weakness of skill. She would flay a young wolf with 2 flat words for giving up and then spend an hour, gentle as Marta, teaching the same wolf the same movement until his body finally understood it. She never raised her hand to any of them. She never needed to. By the end of the first week, the young wolves of Ironmark had stopped seeing her as an enemy captive, and started seeing her as the only teacher who had ever bothered to teach them anything true. And they had begun, in the way of the young, to be a little in love with her, all of them, harmlessly and completely. And so, I think, had I stopped pretending, to myself at least, that what I felt was anything other than what it was. I found reasons to be in the yard. I let her drill me, in front of the young wolves, and she took no account whatsoever of my crown. She corrected my stance by kicking my feet into place, and she told me flatly when I was slow, and she once put me flat on my back in the dust with a movement so economical that I did not understand what had happened until I was already looking up at the sky. And the young wolves gasped, and Neve stood over me exactly as I had stood over her in the pit and reached down, and offered me her hand. I took it. I had offered her mine in the pit and she had refused it. She offered me hers now and I took it, and she pulled me up, and for one moment we stood close in the dust with our hands still joined and the whole yard watching, and I felt the war go quiet in me all the way down, and I saw in her clear eyes that she felt, at last, something too, something that unsettled her far more than any threat ever had. She let go of my hand as if it had grown hot. "Your left foot," she said, too briskly, turning away, "is still an embarrassment to your father's memory." And she went back to the young wolves, but her color was up, and she did not look at me again for the rest of the morning, and I walked back up to the wall with my heart hammering like a boy's. It could not last, of course. Drieg made certain that it did not. He came to me a fortnight after the pit, and this time he did not bring the counsel, and he did not come as a frightened man giving counsel. He came as a man who had finished his calculation. "The pack is unhappy, my king," he said. "You have set a Velic, to teach the sons of the wolves her people killed. You slept through half the morning like a green boy. You spend your days at the practice rail mooning at an enemy captive while the passes freeze and the granaries run thin, and your uncle lies unavenged under a cairn on the ridge. They are not asking any more whether the war unmanned you, my king. They have decided that it did. And a pack that has decided its alpha is weak is a pack that is one hard winter away from tearing itself apart. You know this. You have seen it in other holds. You know what comes next." I did know what comes next. I had spent 4 winters keeping it from coming. "What is it you want, Drieg?" I said, because he wanted something. He had not come to warn me. He had come to sell me a solution to a problem he had spent a fortnight building. He spread his hands, reasonable, a loyal old servant with a heavy duty. "Let the pack have its reckoning," he said. "Properly this time. The old law you invoked, a fighter who stands lives, it cuts both ways, my king. A fighter who has been challenged and refuses to fight is outcast, and everything under her hand reverts to the pack. So challenge is made. Let her go back into the pit freely as a wolf of the hold and not a captive, and let her fight for her place among us the honest way, the way any wolf who comes to Ironmark from outside must fight for a place. If she is what you and the young ones say she is, she will win, and the pack will have to accept her, and your judgment will be proven before them all, and no one will ever again say the king was made a fool by a stray. And if she loses, he let it hang a moment. Then the matter settles itself, and no one can say the king did not give her every fair chance, and the pack is made whole again, and you can sleep at night with a clear conscience instead of a strange one. It was, I have to grant, beautifully made. It gave me no clean way to refuse. To refuse a lawful challenge on her behalf was to admit she could not survive one, which was to prove exactly the weakness Drieg had spent a fortnight seeding. To accept it and forbid her to fight was to make her outcast and forfeit under the same old law I myself had invoked to save her. And to simply crush Drieg, to take his head for the trap it was, would tell 300 frightened wolves that their king would rather kill his own master-at-arms than let his enemy woman face a fair fight, which was, again, precisely the confession he wanted from me. He had built a box, and every wall of it was made of my own law and my own weakness, and there was only one door. "Who is the challenger?" I said. Drieg smiled, and I understood the last and worst of it. "I am my king," he said, "as is my right as master-at-arms when I judge a wolf unfit for the hold. I challenge the Velic woman for her place in Ironmark, in the pit, 3 days hence at the full of the moon before the whole pack." He bowed, deep and mocking and correct. "You may, of course, forbid it. You have only to declare before your council that your judgment cannot survive a fair test and set her outside the law you swore to keep." And he left me there in the box he had built, with my own laws for walls. I went to her that night. She was in the tower, at the arrow slit as always, watching the moon come up over the passes, and when I told her the shape of it she listened without a word until I had finished, and then she was quiet for a long time. "So," she said at last, "there it is, the moment I told you was coming." "It is not my moment, Neve. I did not build this, Drieg." "I know you did not build it." She turned from the window, and her face in the moonlight was very calm, the pit calm, the lake with the wind gone off it, and it frightened me more than tears would have. "That is almost the worst of it. If you had built it I would know exactly where I stood. But you did not, and so you cannot simply unbuild it because you are a king and you are trapped in your own laws, and the only wolf who can walk out of this box," she looked at me steadily, "is me. In the pit, against your master-at-arms, who has held rank in this hold for 20 years and has watched 1,000 fighters and will not, I promise you, come at me like V. Harrow all weight and forward. Drieg is not stupid. Drieg has spent a fortnight watching me teach the old forms in your yard. He knows exactly what I do now. He has been studying me." She let out a slow breath. "V. Harrow did not know what I was. Drieg knows precisely what I am. That is a very different fight." I had not thought of that. It went through me cold. She was right. She was always right about the fight. She had spent 2 weeks teaching my whole yard her every method in the open, where a clever old wolf could stand at the rail and learn her the way she had learned V. Harrow. Drieg had not challenged her out of injured honor. He had waited, deliberately, until he had watched her teach away her every secret, and then he had challenged her into a fight she now had to make with all her cards already face up on the table. "Then you will not fight," I said. "I will not send you into a pit against a wolf who has spent a fortnight learning how to kill you. I will forbid it and let them say what they like about me, and take you over the pass myself tonight and be exactly the weak, mate-blind king he says you are," she said, "and leave your hold to tear itself apart the moment you turn your back, and make me, do you understand this? Make me the wolf who broke Ironmark, the enemy woman who unmade the Alpha King. My father's name is already Ash. I will not let it be the ash that choked the last thing he taught me into cowardice." Her chin came up. "No. I did not survive the ridge and the passes and your pit to be smuggled out a back gate like a shameful thing. If I am to have a place in this hold, and Alpha King, I find that I have started against my own better judgment to want one, then I will have it the way I have had everything in my life, by standing up, in front of all of them, and not falling down. Neve, you cannot fight this one for me, she said gently, which from her was gentler than any endearment. You know you cannot. If you fight it for me, I have no place. I am only a woman the king killed for. This is mine to win or lose. She held my eyes. But there is a thing you can do. Name it anything. Teach with me, she said. These 3 days, not the young wolves me. I have taught your whole yard my forms in the open, and Drieg has learned them all. Which means I need one thing Drieg has not been able to study. I need to know how he fights. His habits. His tells. The old wounds he favors. You have watched him run your pit for years. You sparred him as a boy. You know his body the way I knew V. Harrow's after 3 exchanges. A thin, fierce light came into her face, the War Master's daughter waking all the way up. Give me Drieg, everything you know of how he moves, and I will build you a stranger to throw at him, a fighter he thinks he has studied, who turns out to have one thing left that he never saw. That is how you beat a wolf who knows your forms. You keep one form back. My father taught me that. He always kept one back. And so for 3 days and 3 nights, in the empty practice yard by torchlight, the king of Ironmark taught the last daughter of the Velik how his own master-at-arms fought. Every habit, every favored side, the old knee that had never healed right, the way he dropped his left when he was certain, the impatience that had grown in him over 20 years of never being seriously tested. And Neve took all of it and turned it over in those clever cold hands, and built out of it movement by movement. A single thing she kept back, one answer to one moment that Drieg, for all his fortnight of study, had never once seen her make, because she had never taught it in the open yard. She had known, I understood at last from the very first day, that a wolf who teaches in the open must always keep one form back. She had been keeping it back the whole time. On the last night, when the drills were done and she was breathing hard and slicked with sweat in the torchlight, she stopped and looked at me across the dark yard, and said something she had never said. If I fall in that pit, she said, I want you to know that these were the best days I have had since the ridge. I did not expect them. I did not want them. I braced against them the whole time, and they came anyway. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not, quite. You gave me back the forms, and a yard full of wolves who wanted to learn, and a door that barred from the inside so I could sleep. You gave me a request instead of a demand and left the door open every single time. No one has ever left the door open before. I have spent my whole life bracing for the moment. And you, she shook her head and almost laughed, and it cracked in the middle, you just never arrived. I crossed the yard to her. I did not take her hand. I had learned to let her reach first. I only stood close in the torchlight, and I told her the truth I had been carrying since the pit. Neve, there is a thing I should have told you 2 weeks ago and did not, because I did not have the courage and because I did not want to bind you to a thing you did not choose. When you would not fall in that pit when you got up the 3rd time, something in me stood up and knew you, not the king, the wolf, the part of me the war put to sleep and I thought would never wake. I made myself say it plainly the way she said everything. You are my fated mate. My wolf has known it since the pit. It is why I have slept these 2 weeks for the first time in 4 winters, because near you the war in me lies down. I did not choose it. It was true before I could decide anything. And I have said nothing, because you have had a lifetime of powerful men deciding what you were to them, and I would not be one more. So I am telling you now before the pit, with nothing asked in return. Whatever the bond is in me, it does not make a single claim on you. If you win tomorrow and want to walk over the pass and never see Ironmark again, I will open the gate with my own hands. The bond is mine to carry. It is not a debt you owe. She was very still. You have known since the pit, she said, that I am. Yes. And you left the door open anyway, every day, when you had a reason not to. Especially then, I said. For a long moment she looked at me, and the pit calm was entirely gone from her face, and what was underneath it was raw and young and terrified and alive. And then she did the thing I had been careful for 2 weeks never to ask of her, never to reach for first, never to make her feel was owed. She stepped in and put her forehead against my chest, over the place where the war had lain down, and let out a long, shaking breath, and stood there in the torchlight, in the circle of a devotion she had chosen to walk into with her own 2 feet. I put my arms around her very lightly, so that she could step out of them at any moment, and she did not step out of them. And that was the whole of it. That was more than any glittering ceremony my council had ever paraded through my hall. A tired warrior with her forehead against my heart, and the war quiet, and the moon coming up over the passes on the night before she would have to win her own life. "I have decided something," she said at last, muffled into my chest. "What have you decided?" "I am not going to fall down," she said. The full moon rose, and the pack filled the hall, and this time no one was laughing. They came sober and uneasy. 300 wolves who had spent a fortnight being told by Drieg that their king was mate-blind and weak, and that a Velic woman had unmade him, and who had spent the same fortnight watching that same Velic woman teach their sons to fight better than they themselves had ever learned. They did not know what they wanted to see. That is the most dangerous state a pack can be in, and Drieg had put them in it on purpose, because a pack that does not know what it wants can be told, and Drieg intended to do the telling. He came into the pit stripped to the waist, 20 years of scars written across him, moving in the loose, patient, economical way of a wolf who has fought 1,000 times and does not intend to make a single mistake. He was not V. Harrow. He did not crack his neck or play to the crowd. He simply came down into the pit and looked up at me on my black seat and bowed, correct, mocking, a loyal servant giving his king one last chance to confess his weakness, and then he turned to the gate to wait for her. And Neve came out into the torchlight. She came out as she had gone in the first time, a full head shorter than the wolf who meant to kill her, barefooted on the cold stone, but everything else was changed. She was not a bound captive dragged up the steps to be sport. She was a fighter of the hold, walking freely into the pit to take her place in the plain clothes of the practice yard, her hair bound back off her face, her feet finding the stone the way I had watched them find it 100 times in the yard. And when she reached the center of the pit, she did not look at the roaring pack, and she did not look at Drieg. She looked up once at me. I could not save her. I could not fight this one for her. I could only meet her eyes and let her see that the war in me was quiet, and that I believed in her, and that the gate would open whichever way it went. She looked away and settled her weight, and it began. It was nothing like the fight with V. Harrow. There was no wild charge, no ruinous strength for her to slip and punish. Drieg came at her carefully, at range, testing, feinting, drawing her out, a clever old wolf who had spent a fortnight learning her every form, checking each of them off as she showed it, herding her, patient, toward the mistake he was certain her youth would make. And she gave him what he expected. That was the terrible, beautiful thing I understood as I watched, gripping the arms of the black seat. She was letting him find every form he had studied, one by one, letting him grow certain, letting him believe he had learned the whole of her in the yard. Twice he caught her and the pack surged, and twice she recovered in exactly the way the old forms taught, the way he had watched her teach, and twice I saw the certainty deepen in him, the way it deepens in a wolf who thinks he has already won. And on the third exchange, Drieg dropped his left. I had told her about the left. He drops it when he is certain. 20 years of never being seriously tested had grown a flaw in him the size of a fortnight's arrogance, and she had spent 3 nights building one single answer to the one moment when a wolf certain of victory forgets to guard the side he has never needed to guard. He dropped his left, sure of her, reaching to end it with the strike he had used to end 1,000 fighters. And she was not where the study said she would be. She made the one form she had kept back, the form she had never once shown in the open yard, that Drieg had never had the chance to learn, that her father had drilled into her in a burned hold that no longer existed, against exactly this moment, against a bigger wolf grown certain. She came up under his dropped left with her whole body turning behind it, hip and shoulder, and the cold stone of the pit driving up through the earth into her arm, and she struck the old knee that had never healed right. And then, as it buckled, she was already inside, already turning, and she took the certainty of the master at arms of Ironmark and used all of it, all his weight and all his forward momentum and all his 20 years of never being made to fall, and she put him down. She put him down hard on his back in the churned red dust of his own pit, with her forearm across his throat and her knee on the arm that could have reached a blade, and she held him there, pinned, helpless, undone, in front of the 300 wolves he had spent a fortnight turning against his king. The hall did not roar. The hall made no sound at all. 300 wolves stared down into the pit at the last daughter of the Velic kneeling on the throat of the man who had run their reckoning for 20 years, and the silence was the loudest thing I have ever heard. And Neve looked down at Drieg, and she did not kill him. She could have. By the law of the pit, with him pinned and beaten, she had the right. It was what he would have taken from her. It was what the pack, in its uneasy blood hunger, half expected. She held him a long moment, letting him feel it, letting every wolf in that hall see that his life was hers. And then she lifted her forearm from his throat and rose off him and stepped back and left him lying in the dust alive. "I am not of your pack," she said into the silence, and her rough voice carried to every corner of my hall. "Your king made me no promises he did not keep, and I owe you nothing, and there is not one wolf here whose people did not help burn my home. I had every right to your master's life. I am giving it back to him." She looked around the hall slowly at all of them. "'Cause I am the last of the Velic, and the Velic did not make cruelty into a custom, and I will not begin now to please a hall that came to watch me die. Keep your master at arms. Teach your sons the old forms so that the next time a clever enemy comes down through your passes, your children do not have to learn what mine learned. That is the whole of what I want from you. That is the whole of what I have ever wanted from anyone." Her chin came up level, unbroken. "I stood. I did not fall. By your own law and your king's, I have a place. I will thank you not to make me win it a third time." And then, into that vast and terrible silence, one wolf began to strike the table. It was one of the young ones, one of the boys she had taught in the yard, a boy whose father lay under a cairn on the ridge, who had come to hate the Velic in his cradle and had spent a fortnight learning that the only teacher who had ever bothered to teach him anything true was a Velic woman. He struck the table once, hard, with the flat of his hand, and then again, and the young wolf beside him took it up. And then the whole of that end of the hall, all the ones she had taught, all the ones who had come to love her harmlessly and completely in the practice yard, hammering the tables, not the drunken blood hunger of the first reckoning, but something else, something that had not been heard in my hall in 4 winters. My pack, choosing. And then the older wolves, uncertain, hammered too. And then all of them. And the hall of Ironmark that had come to watch an enemy woman die rose to its feet and thundered its tables for the last daughter of the Velic standing unbroken in the pit. And Drieg dragged himself up out of the dust into a hall that was no longer his to turn, and understood that he had lost not the fight, but the pack, and that he had lost it to the very forms he had thought he was clever enough to study. I came down the steps into my pit for the second time in my life. She was standing in the center of it, breathing hard, blood at the corner of her mouth again, swaying just slightly now that it was over. She watched me come, and this time there was no lake-cold calm to hide behind. There was only Neve, exhausted and alive, and looking at me across the last of the distance between us. I stopped in front of her. The hall thundered around us. I did not take her hand. I knelt. I, Aldrich, Alpha King of Ironmark, went down on one knee in the churned red dust of my own reckoning pit, in front of my whole pack, before the daughter of the enemy my father's war had made, not to claim her, not to crown her, not to take one single thing from her, but to offer in the only language a pack understands, the truth I had told her in the dark yard, that whatever I was hers to accept or refuse, and that the choosing was entirely her own. "You stood," I said low for her, though the whole hall could see it. "You did not fall. You have your place, and no wolf living will take it from you." I looked up at her, And beyond the law and owing you nothing, asking you nothing, I would have you at my side, Neve of the Velic, not as a spoil, not as a captive, not as anything the pit made. As my equal and my mate, if you will have a king who inherited a war he should have ended sooner, and who cannot give you back what his people burned, and who can only promise you a door that will be open every single day for the rest of your life. I held out my hand open, offered the way I had offered it the very first night when she had looked at it as a snake. The gate is open behind you. It always will be, but if you would rather stay. She looked at my open hand for a long time. And then the last daughter of the Velic, who had braced her whole life against the moment, who had learned in the wreck of everything she loved that a strong man's kindness was only cruelty that had not yet arrived, reached down, in front of the whole thundering hall, and took the King of Ironmark's hand, and closed her fingers around it and chose. "My father," she said, and her rough voice shook now at last, and she let it, kept one form back his whole life, the most important one. He taught it to me at the end. He said the strongest thing a fighter can do is not the strike she has been drilling in the open where everyone can see. It is the one she has held in reserve all along, for the one wolf worth spending it on. She drew me up out of the dust by the hand she had taken, until we stood together in the center of the pit that had been meant to be her grave, and the hall roared and roared. I have been keeping one back too, Alpha King. The whole time, bracing and keeping it back and waiting for you to arrive so I could stop. She let out the shaking breath, and something in her let go that had been held 4 winters and a burned hold in a lifetime of open pits. You never arrived, so I will have to be the one to close the distance. I choose to stay. Do you hear me? Not because you saved me, you did not. I saved myself in front of all of them twice. I choose to stay because you left the door open, and because near you I have wanted, for the first time since the ridge, to stop bracing and put down the guard and be, for 1 hour of my life, something other than the last of a murdered pack. I choose it, mine to choose, and I choose you. I did not kiss her in the pit. That is not the sort of wolves we were, and it was not the sort of thing that belonged in that place, in front of that many eyes. I only held her hand and stood with her in the center of the pit, and let the hall thunder, and felt the whole war in me lie all the way down at last, quiet and finally, and for good. We did not hold a great ceremony. Neither of us had the taste for it, and the pack, having chosen her in the pit, did not need one. A wolf who has been chosen in front of the whole hold is more surely Luna than any crowning could make her. Drieg I did not kill, because she had given his life back and it was not mine to take again. But I stripped him of the reckoning and the mastery of arms, and I gave both to a wolf who had earned my trust in the war. And Drieg lived out his years in the hold as a lesson to any wolf who thought a clever trap was the same thing as a true heart. He had taught me one useful thing, at least, though he never meant to, that a king who rules around a lie the size of a mountain is no king, and that the only way out of a box built from your own laws is to have the courage to be seen choosing something in front of everyone. I did the thing I had told her I would do that first day at the practice rail. I gave the old forms a place of honor in Ironmark. The war master of the Velic, the wolf who had put my uncle down at the ridge and whom 4 of my own had died to stop, his art did not die in a tower with the last of his blood. It is taught now in the open to every young wolf of the hold, so that the next time a clever enemy comes down through the passes, the children of Ironmark will not have to learn in a burned hold and a losing war what her father learned. That is the amends I could make. It was not enough. There is no amends that could be enough. But it was true, and she said, once, quietly, watching a yard full of young Ironmark wolves flow through the slow foot-first drills her father had drilled into her. She said it was the only thing anyone had ever given back to her that she had actually wanted. The reckoning pit I never used again. I had it swept out, the old black blood scoured from the stone, the pit gate taken off its hinges, and I gave it to her. It is the winter training ground now, when the snow closes the passes and the young wolves cannot drill in the open yard, They come down into the pit that was built for killing, and they learn, in the warm torchlight, how to stand up and not fall down. Some nights I go down and watch from the steps, the way she used to catch me hovering. And some nights I find her already there, alone, in the center of the pit where she knelt in the dust and would not beg, moving slowly through the old forms by herself in the dark, the last of a murdered people keeping the thing that could not be murdered alive with her own 2 hands. She sleeps behind a door that no longer needs to bar from the inside, though I had it made so it still can, because a promise is a promise, and the door was always hers. She sleeps deeply now. So do I. The war in both of us lay down in that pit, and it has never gotten up again. I asked her once in the dark, in the first winter of it, why she had gotten up the 3rd time against V. Harrow, when any sane wolf would have stayed down and let it end. She was quiet a while. Then she said, "Because my father told me that the whole of everything a wolf is comes down to what she does after she has already been knocked down as far as she can go. Anyone can stand up the first time. The wolf you are is the one who stands up the last time, when there is no reason left to." She turned in the dark and put her forehead against my chest, over the quiet place, the way she had that night in the yard. "I stood up the last time," she said, "and there you were, on your feet, on your black seat, on your feet before I was on mine, though you did not know yet why. I have thought about that a great deal. You were rising before you knew. I like that it was that way round. It means you did not choose me because I was worth choosing. Something in you knew me before there was anything to reckon. That is the only kind of choosing I could ever have believed. I have been a king, and I have fought a long war, and I have carried the dead down a mountain. But I think, when I am old, the thing I will hold in reserve against the dark, the one form I keep back for the last of everything, will be that. A small fierce warrior kneeling in the dust of a pit that was meant to end her, refusing to fall, and the whole of me rising toward her before I knew her name, before I knew anything at all except that she would not go down, and that I was already and forever on my feet.